Hello, mathematicians. Okay, today we are on lesson 2. Now, today for lesson 2, it does get just a little bit harder. It actually, once you see it, not so bad. But I did have to combine here our step number 1 into 2 boxes because there is kind of a third step in simplifying your equations. So I'm still going to follow my same set of rules. I'm going to follow them in the same order. But this time we do have this variable on both sides. Now remember, yesterday we only had the x or the y or the variable on one side and we solved. This time a little messier because it is on both sides, but there is a quick fix for that. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at number 1. I have 5y minus 8 equals 3y plus 12. Now, what we have to remember here is that I need to get the y's all on the same side. So there is a rule that I need you to remember. If you're moving a whole term, so when moving a term, you use add or subtract. In other words, we're still going to be making that 0, but I'll give more information when we actually do the work here. So this is something very important to remember. When moving a term, you only use add or subtract. Okay, so let's look at number 1 here. So simplify. We do need to distribute. There are no parentheses. Combine like terms. Well, we do need to put our y's together, but notice that they are on different sides of the equal sign. That means I can't just bring them together because they're on a different side. So I actually have to move the term together. So remember, when we are moving a term, we have to use add or subtract. Now I do a little bit of thinking ahead of time. I do either have to move the 3y to the left side, or I can move the 5y to the right side. It doesn't matter, the answer comes out the same. I prefer to move the smaller ones because then I do not end up with a negative. So in this case, to simplify, I am going to take my 3y and I'm going to move it. Now I'm going to move it by using the opposite, just like I'm making a 0. So since I now have moved this, it no longer is on this side and it moves to this side. But I have to use the inverse operation, so minus 3y. Now, like I always say, rewrite, because otherwise it gets messy. 5y minus 3y is 2y. Then I still have my negative 8. And then on this side now, I only have a 12. Okay, so now I am going to make the constant 0. Now, notice that my constant is a negative 8, and I want this to be a 0. Right? So what am I going to do? I'm going to add 8. Whatever I do to one side, I have to do to the other. Go ahead and rewrite. I've got 2y equals 12 plus 8 is 20. Okay, now step 3. I want to make my coefficient a 1. Now, in order to make my coefficient a 1, I have to undo the multiplication here. So I'm going to divide by 2. 2 divided by 2 is a 1. Whatever I do to one side, I do to the other. So now I have y equals 10. And I am done. Okay, let's do one more simpler one, and then we'll jump to the back to do one of the harder ones. Okay, I notice here that I do have variables on both sides. I don't need to distribute. But my like terms are on opposite sides of the equal sign. So I'm going to have to move one to the other side. And when I move, I only use add or subtract. Now this time, I want to move my negative 8 because when I move my negative 8, I'm actually going to add a positive 8x. And when I move it to this side, it's going to give me a positive number. So I'm going to go ahead and rewrite. I have a negative 6 and a positive 8x, so I get 2x. Plus 14 equals 12. Because remember, I moved that over and flipped the sign. Okay, so now we're going to move on to step 2. Step 2 says I need to make my constant a 0. So since my constant is a positive 14, I'm going to use a negative 14. Whatever I do to one side, I have to do to the other. So now I'm going to rewrite. I've got a 2x. My 0 is done. And I have 12 minus 14. It gives me a negative 2. Okay, time to make the coefficient a 1. And notice in this one, I have 2 times x, so I'm going to divide by 2 to make it a 1. And whatever I do to one side, I do to the other. So now I get x equals, this is a negative 1. And we are done. Okay, now I am going to flip to the other side because the other side is a little messier. I will do number 7 with you before letting you start working on your own. Okay, so notice in number 7, before we can start to solve, we do need to simplify. Notice I do have distributive property here. So I am going to go 3 times 6p and 3 times negative 1, just so that I can start to crack this equation apart. Okay, 3 times 6 is 18. P is just hanging out. 3 times a negative 1 is negative 3. Then on this side, I have 11p minus 45. Okay, now I've gotten rid of my distributive property, but now I need to bring my like terms together, but they are on the opposite sides of the equation, so I can only move them by adding or subtracting. So I notice I'm going to move my smaller one. Remember, it's always easier to move so I don't end up with a negative. So I'm going to move it by subtracting. Remember, I am technically making a 0 here too. So if I have a negative 11p on this side, I have a negative 11p on this side. Now let's go ahead and rewrite. I've got 18p minus 11p, which gives me a 7p, minus 3 equals, do not forget that negative 45, negative 45. Just because I moved the 11p doesn't mean that negative goes away. It is still there. Okay, now I need to make my, let's see, what color was I using? Oh yeah, my constant 0, here we go. My constant needs to be a 0. Since that is a negative 3, I'm going to use a positive 3. And whatever I do to one side, I do to the other. And now this becomes a 0. And I am going to rewrite this so I can see what's going on. 7p equals a negative 45, and a positive 3 is a negative 42. Okay, final step. I need to make my coefficient a 1. Since I have a 7 times p, I'm going to do 7 divided by 7. That becomes a 1. Whatever you do to one side, you do to the other. And I end up with p equals negative 6. And I am done. Now go ahead and review this if you need to. Remember, you need to do at least 5 on your own, and then you can either finish up the worksheet or jump into Delta Math.